Hey, welcome to Film Fanatics, three film geeks discussing movies both new and old. My name is Dan.
My name is Justin.
And I'm Joe.
This week we review Thor, The Dark World, the latest movie in the Avengers line, and the Robert De Niro, Morgan Freeman comedy Last Vegas. Our triple feature of older movies this week consists of new classic The Descendants, old classic Nicholas Nickleby, and our Oscar A to Z film 1938's The Adventures of Robin Hood. We also have our newest feature, which we debuted last week, the Home Media Moment, taking a look at a film recently released on home video and on demand that we did not get to review for the show. And this week, that's The Way Back. Our top 5 is inspired by Last Vegas, and that's movies that take place in Vegas. And we will also talk about a new addition to our weekly lineup of older movies, and that is classic movie serials. Now that's cereals with an S, not breakfast cereals inspired by movies such as Jurassic Park Crunch and C-3POs. And yes, those were actual breakfast cereals, Joe.
He didn't tell me about that. I'm about to laugh.
Yeah, well, there's also Bill and Ted's Excellent Cereal, but
I can believe it. You know, brands with their own cereals based on movies, totally.
There's tons of them. But anyway, that's not what we're talking about, and that will all become clear if you don't already know what a cereal is. First, though, we have our new releases for the week, and we're going to start with Thor, The Dark World, which opened at number 1 this week at the box office with around 90 million. Not too bad. Joe's going to tell us about Thor, The Dark World.
Well, Thor 2, The Dark World is kind of a follow-up from Thor the original as well as the Avengers. And basically it follows Thor finally returning back to Earth to be reunited with his love Jane, played by Natalie Portman. And it turns out that there is a new evil force, apparently this race of dark elves who have been lying dormant for a long time, enemies of the Asgardians, have returned using a dark substance known as the Ether in an attempt to bring the universe into a time of darkness and evil and all kinds of awesome despair. So basically Thor is pitted against them, and there are some silly antics and lots of action. I'll start with the positives. I think that there is a lot of great chemistry between Thor and Loki, and obviously Chris Hemsworth and Tom Hiddleston, they've really got it down. And it also speaks to the writing, I think. In terms of character development, they really have continued to move on with the relationship, and it's been pretty good. I think that was probably the highlight of the movie for me. I think they're really expanding on Loki's character, and he really does steal the show. There's also a lot of really good action, particularly towards the third act of the movie, I think is the strongest point. And there is some comedy. I'd say it's very fun. There's a lot of good jokes in there. I think that there are a few misses, but overall it's pretty enjoyable. But I had some problems with it. I think it's most the fact that the movie takes a while to kind of get going. And a big part of that, I think, is that there's something about this movie that just seemed a little rushed to me. Like, it didn't have the same epic feel and scope as the first Thor movie, which I really think is essential to a Thor story, because he's really a character that is kind of embedded in fantasy. And this story kind of confused some of those magical elements by kind of going towards a more sci-fi direction, which is not really true to the comics and not really all that necessary. And the biggest problem I had was that I felt that Christopher Eccleston, who played the Ninth Doctor in Doctor Who is a great actor, was completely wasted in this role. I mean, granted, he did do, I guess, a pretty good job with what he was given, but the character of Malekith was basically kind of a bland, cliche villain. Really, I just wish there could have been more expanded on. The biggest problem I had with the movie was that I never felt that there was a real sense of danger for the heroes. It just seemed like the directors wanted to kind of have a good time and kind of play everything for laughs, which sometimes worked, but I just felt like I didn't care about certain things. Like, I'm not going to spoil anything, but there is a death that occurs in the film, and I didn't feel anything. I thought that they were doing something really interesting with the character, which I liked, and then they just kind of wiped them out, and it didn't really have time to register. And then they try to do similar things in the movie later on, and I think because of the tone they were going for, it didn't quite work. I had a lot of frustrating feelings about the movie. I honestly feel like, of all the Marvel movies thus far, I honestly think that this was the one that I was the most underwhelmed by, and honestly a bit disappointed with. However, I think that overall it was fun, and it does pick up the pace towards the third act. It does become more entertaining, and it's definitely worth a watch, but I really do think that it is probably the weakest Marvel Studios film I've seen thus far, and I'm hoping that future installments will be better. Still, there are some promising things leading up to the end. I'm going to give Thor Dark World a B-.
Now, when you say the worst in the Marvel series, you're talking Avengers-based movies, right? I mean, not Daredevil and stuff like that.
When I say Marvel Studios, I mean like that one around the Avengers-based, that their company's directly going for.
Gotcha.
It's obviously no Ghost Rider.
Right. I just wanted to clarify that, because there have been some stinkers in the bunch.
No, as I want to clarify, I think it's a pretty good movie, but by the standard that's been set by these movies thus far, it was bordering on mediocrity and cheesiness. But before you guys continue, there is another little thing that bugged me. I think that there was a budget cutback in this movie at some point, because Natalie Portman's Jane character has like a scientific doohickey, which is obviously a graphing calculator, and that really, really bugged me. And I just noticed little things like that. And I thought that the costume designs for the Dark Elves were really kind of cheap, and I don't know. I just felt like there was something kind of lacking there. And the movie was also really short. I felt like they could have expanded on certain things.
It's definitely one of the shorter in the Marvel canon.
And I think that might be a problem. They could have definitely added an extra 15, 20 minutes, half hour even. I felt like the movie was over before anything really happened. Everything just happened too fast for me. So, I don't know. I'm curious to what you guys think about it.
Well, let's go to Justin first. Justin?
Okay, so in the last podcast, we discussed my concerns about having to get Joss Whedon to help out with the overall narrative for the film. After seeing it, I feel like these concerns are more than justified. It's often confusing trying to decipher what exactly the movie is trying to do, and the end result feels as if the audience is seeing a bunch of really fun and interesting ideas with little to no connectivity. That's not to say that the visuals are not still really impressive, albeit the 3D is a complete and utter waste of time. And the action sequences are, for the most part, fun and engaging. Similar to the original, Thor does take a bit to actually get moving, but truth be told, it does get better, as Joe put it, as it gets along, despite said flaws. My biggest issue with this one stems with the fact that, with the exception of Tom Hiddleston as Loki, no one really brings any form of emotional weight to the story, which, honestly, this really dark, no pun intended, story really needed. Aside from his usual menacing antics, Hiddleston provides much of the humor of the story, and even gives the film what I consider its one really emotional moment. For what's being considered Phase 2 of the Marvel Studios film franchise, the first two installments, Iron Man 3 and this, of course, have been really underwhelming, and I am honestly hoping that Captain America, the Winter Soldier, and Guardians of the Galaxy can manage to turn that around. But for right now, Thor: The Dark World gets B- as well.
I'm glad you brought up the parallel between Iron Man 3, Justin, because that's exactly what I was going to say. Like, I love that Marvel has created this entire universe with the Avengers movies and the offshoots, and is going to continue to do so for years to come. It's one of the few film series ever that can boast that kind of reach with so many different movie franchises within the same universe. But this year, the series of Marvel films just have been a bit of a letdown. I thought Iron Man 3 was very underwhelming, and I think Thor: The Dark World is about on par with it. Just in terms of being engaging enough, but in the grand scheme of the Marvel Universe, not living up to the potential set forth with some of the other stories. There's definitely some interesting visual aspects to Thor that look both futuristic and retro all at the same time. And the storyline, though pretty confusing, is decent enough. Something the Avengers movies know how to do for the most part is cast their heroes and villains well. And you guys both touched on Tom Hiddleston as Loki, and he really is a fantastic character. We got to see it a bit in the Avengers, but there was so much going on in that movie that even though he was the main villain, it was mostly about the core group, the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents and the heroes, and I don't think he got to really shine as much in that movie with his character. But in The Dark World, you really get a great glimpse into Loki's psyche and his struggle between being a good guy and a bad guy and everything that comes with that. And Justin, you hit the nail on the head. He really is the only actor that brings any sort of meatiness to his role. Kat Dennings and Natalie Portman are fine, with the comic relief and the romance stuff, and it's all fine and good. But the film just got weighed down with confusing subplots, an ending that didn't make any sense to me. And Joe, you hit on something as well. There was never really any huge concern that anybody was going to lose Thor in this movie. Like in most of these movies, especially in the Iron Mans, they've done really well with, oh my god, how's Tony Stark going to get out of this? And there just wasn't that urgency here.
Which, based upon the villain and everything he had, it seemed like there should have been a pretty big threat.
Right,
I mean, the guy was trying to end the universe. It seemed like that was, something to worry about.
Yeah, exactly. And yet, it was almost like an afterthought, of Thor. Oh, well, I have to get back with my girlfriend, and we have to figure out what's going on with her, and this thing that's embodied her. And then maybe if we have time, we'll go try and save the world.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to ask you guys, my biggest problem with the first movie actually was that I thought the romance was a bit rushed and underdeveloped. How do you guys think they did it in this one?
I think that the romance part was okay. I don't think that it was that rushed in the first one. I thought it was okay in the first one as well. Mm-hmm. But I do agree with your statement that the movie on the whole was short. And it didn't necessarily feel long. So it could have been easily 15 more minutes and they could have fleshed out some of these other issues. I don't think the romance necessarily needed to be fleshed out. I think it is what it is, and I'm okay with it.
Well, I guess I just thought it was kind of a shallow romance, personally. I thought they kind of did something rather weird with Natalie Portman's character. I just didn't quite buy into it. And I thought it was interesting they decided to make that the center of the movie this time around. Mm-hmm. And I think they're improving on it. But, I don't know, I just kind of wish it was something they'd take more time to deal with. But
I don't really like her character in general as a romantic aspect. I mean, I like her scientist stuff.
That's what I mean. I kind of, that's what I'm saying. I feel like it's not really necessary because Thor is one of those characters that doesn't really need a romantic interest. And I just felt it was really forced. And if they're going to use it, I just feel like they should. And this time I just felt like it was kind of the center unnecessarily to me. But
it's interesting that you say in the first movie it was rushed. To me, it was just more or less abrupt, and I think the main reason that it comes off that way just is simply the fact that Hemsworth and Portman just don't have chemistry. Unfortunately, it's true.
I think there is something there, but I do agree it's not like the best chemistry, and maybe that's part of it.
Actually, maybe that's what it is, that I don't really care that much about the romance.
It was the one thing I felt that was the weakest part of the movie, and it was supposed to be so crucial to his character that I felt like it should have worked better. I guess what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's no Gwyneth Paltrow and Robert Downey Jr., who I know, I guess you say also.
I don't think they have chemistry either.
I think they do.
I think it's definitely better.
I love their romance.
Yeah, you could have probably agreed.
Anyway, I'm going to give Thor: The Dark World a B- as well.
Oh, we all agree on that one.
Yeah, it was just not their best effort, I think.
No, but they could have done worse.
Yeah, it definitely could have been worse. But I have to say, since we did all see it in 3D, 3D showings is where you can find the extended trailer for Captain America: The Winter Soldier, and that looks really good.
It really does.
I'm really excited to see that.
I'm not getting my hopes up.
Not after Iron Man 3 and Thor 2?
Nope. After these two, I'm just going to see what happens. If I'm surprised, I'm surprised.
All right, we got a lot of ground to cover, so we're going to move on here. Our next new movie is Las Vegas, and Justin is going to tell us about that.
Okay, so Las Vegas is about 4 lifelong friends. Billy, played by Michael Douglas, Patty, played by Robert De Niro, Archie, played by Morgan Freeman, and Sam, played by Kevin Kline, now in their 60s, and are still relatively good friends, with the exception of Patty, who insists on feuding with Billy for his constant absences in his life. However, when Billy reveals that he is getting married, the 3 run off to Vegas and persuade Patty to come with them as the occasion draws near. While it's no surprise that the premise of Las Vegas has been seen before in about a number of different variations, it's quite unexpected to find that the film is funnier more often than most. Although I do confess the jokes about their age sometimes get tired in the film, and the narrative is rather predictable, particularly when they bring in Mary Steenburgen as a love interest, it does make great use of the ensemble, offering a number of entertaining moments with each character, without overly relying on any particular one, and because of that, it packs a great sense of humor. Las Vegas gets a B for me.
Yeah, a few weeks ago when we reviewed the Stallone-Schwarzenegger movie Escape Plan, I made mention that I was really glad that the guys didn't rely on the tired I'm old jokes for the comedy relief in the film. I think that using that kind of geriatric humor to provide laughs in an action movie is lazy. However, in a comedy, they can be mostly excused because those kind of jokes are only part of the picture. And Las Vegas has many other avenues of laughter that they also explore. When you have 5 Oscar winners as the leads in one film, you're bound to get a product that rises above its uneven and predictable script. And that's exactly what happens in Las Vegas. Pulled from the Grumpy Old Men Handbook, this movie has childhood friends who fought over the same girl as children, fighting over a woman again, who, like Justin said, is played by Mary Steenburgen. And, of course, there are obvious Viagra and who died jokes. But beyond that, this movie does actually bring genuine laughs, particularly with, for me, the two standouts of the film, Morgan Freeman, as you'd probably expect, and Kevin Kline, who you might not. Unfortunately, those two are sort of side characters to the main storyline, which heavily involves De Niro and Michael Douglas. Though the plot and script are predictable, like I said, and Justin also mentioned, the actors give it their all and do bring genuine laughs for all ages. And I also give Las Vegas a B.
I want to bring something up. You mentioned that they both gave really great performances, and I agree with that completely. One thing that struck me as interesting was, despite the fact that they may have been a little bit more off to the side as less important characters, I was really attached to what was going on in their general subplots.
Oh, I was too. That's why they were the most engaging characters in the film, and I thought the funniest. They were the only ones that had some sort of wild card presence to them. Like we both kind of mentioned, the love triangle between Mary Steenburgen, Robert De Niro, and Michael Douglas is the most predictable part of the movie. They did it already in Grumpy Old Men. They've done it in countless other romance movies for younger people. So, really, the most interesting characters are Kevin Kline's and Morgan Freeman's.
I was really surprised by Morgan Freeman because I was expecting him to be sort of the least funny out of the group, because we know Freeman for more of his more dramatic roles, Shawshank Redemption, and I thought that was a big surprise. Kevin Kline, I honestly can't even remember the last movie I've seen him in.
Now, Joe has not seen this movie, first of all.
I have not, but I'm surprised you guys are surprised Kevin Kline's funny.
Well, I think, like Justin said, just because we haven't seen him in...
He was great in Dave. I mean, comedy is kind of his shtick.
I've never seen Dave.
Well, I have, and I love
Dave
it.
is a good movie.
So,
I agree. But again, that was 1993.
Well, I think
so we're talking about a 20-year-old movie.
It doesn't necessarily mean he's lost his game, though.
No, it doesn't. But I think you never really know what to expect when you haven't seen somebody on screen in that long of a time. And Justin, have you ever seen Bruce Almighty?
I have, but I wouldn't consider that a really comedic performance from him. I think it's a funny movie. I do. But I don't think he was necessarily the main area of all the humor. I think
obviously it's not the main area. It's a Jim Carrey movie with Steve Carell in it. But
of course.
I thought the real surprise was when we first saw him in that. That he's now done in a few different movies. I mean, The Bucket List he wasn't laugh out loud hilarious in, but The Bucket List was more of a light kind of movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so
I can agree with that.
I like that Morgan Freeman's branching out a bit into, you know, some of these more comedic roles. But I do have to say, it was still surprising how funny he was in this. And Joe, hopefully you'll get to see it this week, and we'll look forward to a quick review from you next week.
Judging from you guys said, I actually do want to see it, and I will give like a few words about it, because I do like all the actors. I love the cast, and Kevin Kline is one of my favorites. I think I did list Dave in my top 25, so
oh, cool.
I'm just really surprised you guys didn't think he'd be funny. I mean,
it's just, you know, sort of out of sight, out of mind, I guess.
But I guess he hasn't done a whole lot in probably about a decade.
You know?
Yeah, you're right.
Moving on to some...
something more intense.
Yeah, something a little bit more intense here is 12 Years a Slave. Chiwetel Ejiofor. Remember the name because you'll be hearing it a lot during Oscar season. He plays Solomon Northup in 12 Years a Slave, a free man who was kidnapped and sold into slavery for 12 years in this true story. He was given the new name Platt and could read and write just fine, but had no contact with his wife and children or anybody else that could help make him a free man once again. Dealing with some of the worst conditions imaginable and working for one master in particular, played by Michael Fassbender, for whom which deplorable, appalling, and disgusting would be some of the nicer things you could say about him. There is no doubt that this film is a dramatic masterpiece, and I will not be surprised in the least if it comes out with a Best Picture Oscar win, let alone a nomination next year. The acting in it is top-notch, including turns from Brad Pitt, Benedict Cumberbatch, and another newcomer, Lupita Nyong'o, who plays one of Platt's best friends and confidants on the plantation, Patsy. However, it is an incredibly hard film to watch, and between the whippings, the hangings, and the rape, it is not for the faint of heart. But I found it all too gratuitous. There is no reason, other than maximum uncomfortability, to see a person hanging with their feet scraping the mud for literally minutes. It's bad enough to show a slave getting whipped for minutes, harder and harder, but then to pan out and see her naked, bloody back with dozens of welts, and then again in the next scene. We get it. Slavery is the absolute worst thing that's ever happened in this country. That is not new information. And I think there are more subtle ways to make the point. While I concede that Northup's story is an incredibly important one for us to never forget, and that this is probably an A-plus film on the surface, about half of my grade, as we've discussed previously on the show, is based on my enjoyment of the film. And because I was squirming through entire chunks of 12 Years a Slave, I have to leave it with an A- for my grade. Joe?
You know, it's funny. I think that the main reason I like the film so much is one of the main reasons you were so uncomfortable with it.
Because of its intensity.
I think that was the point. It really had this delicacy to it, but at the same time, it really, really had this incredible sense of just anguish, I think, to explore what these characters are going through. And I don't think I've ever seen a film really explore that side of slavery in such depth. I mean, and to honestly see what it was like. I mean, to show those visuals of the woman getting whipped and, you know, just constantly getting worse and worse, and the rape and everything else. I mean, it really captured a sense of how ingrained and indoctrinated people were to think a certain way. These people were doing these terrible things to other human beings, but they didn't see a problem with it. And I think that the film really captures that with this brilliant atmosphere. And the cinematography in this film really helps with that. The director really liked to use these slow shots, just these tiny little details to help reflect that. Like maybe the letter burning, you know, kind of the slow crumple, and like, you know, just a caterpillar, you know, and at the same time, the man hanging. I mean, he didn't want to let anything slide. It was just kind of fitting with this intensity. And it was really well balanced. I really, really thought it had this wholesome nature to it. And it was just permeating throughout the entire film. Complemented by the acting. I mean, it was just amazing. I think that it's quite honestly a perfect historical drama. And I think the intensity really accentuated that. And I think that it would have been cheated if they didn't go forward with it. Because I think that was honestly the message they were trying to explore. So I would give 12 Years a Slave an A+. No problem.
Yeah, I mean, like I say before we get to Justin, on the surface, I would give it an A+ based on its technical merits, based on everything about the film. But I didn't like watching it. I really didn't. And I understand completely that the intensity was the point.
To be fair, actually, I should make a note of here. There were a couple scenes, particularly the one in which someone is forced to whip someone else. I actually did get a little teary. Like, there were a couple moments where it actually really did affect me. So I understand, like, there were a couple parts that were intense to watch. And it's funny, I'm actually not sure that I would ever watch this film again.
Yeah, I don't think I can ever see it again.
Because I would kind of prefer something like Django Unchained, which kind of took that, but made it more entertaining.
Right.
You know, so I do appreciate the subject matter. I understand history, and I love it. And it's definitely a good thing to use film to explore these stories. It is important. So I approve of what the film does, but I do understand where you're coming from. It's not an easy film for everyone to watch, and go in bearing that in mind. But it's still worth checking out.
I feel the same about Schindler's List, too. I don't think that's a movie I could ever watch again.
Another one, Saving Private Ryan, for me. I saw it one time, and that was enough.
And that's enough.
That was enough for me, honestly.
Justin, I want to hear your thoughts on 12 Years a Slave.
Please.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for the encouragement.
No problem.
If there's one thing I love about Steve McQueen, no relation to the actor, as a director, it would be that he is largely action-centered. Instead of spoon-feeding the audience spoken exposition, he lets the scenes themselves do the talking, which allows not only for the viewers to draw their own conclusions, but manages to really make his characters act out their emotions, and give us much more depth to them as a whole. He did this in Shame, which was my first encounter with his work that I viewed last year, and it blew me away, and I can safely say that he has not lost his touch in 12 Years a Slave. If anything, I would argue he's emphasized it even more than ever, offering an even greater range of depth and emotion from his characters, beautifully handled by leading man Chiwetel Ejiofor, alongside the rest of his ensemble. I can't promise that 12 Years a Slave is an easy watch. It will anger and frustrate, if not infuriate, but by the end, it will come very close, if not completely bring viewers to tears. To miss out on this film would mean missing out on easily one of the year's best films, and that in and of itself would be a grave mistake. 12 Years a Slave gets a very well-deserved high A.
Would any of you be surprised if it won Best Picture next year, because I would not.
I
Not
think
the
it's
slightest.
probably going to win. I don't see.
I do too.
Even for the rest of the slot for the year.
Yeah, obviously there's a couple more months left, but
I don't think so.
I don't either. And obviously Ejiofor is sort of being buzzed about for a Best Actor win. I think the Best Actor race is maybe a little bit more wide open because there are a lot of good performances in recent months, especially Tom Hanks and Captain Phillips. But I wouldn't be surprised if he walks away with a Best Actor Oscar either.
There was actually one or two minor things that kind of disappointed me, and it was just the fact that certain actors that were in the movie I kind of wanted to see more of. Like,
is Paul Giamatti one of them?
Paul Giamatti is definitely the biggest one because I think he was in like 2 scenes, and he gives a great performance, but he's kind of actually sort of one of the main villains of the movie, but he's in very briefly. I kind of wanted to see more of him.
I was actually, when he left, I was actually kind of expecting him to come back in some way, shape, or form.
I thought he was going to also.
He seemed like it. Maybe that they wanted to do something with him, but decided that.
I mean, he didn't need to, but
but he was like kind of. If they did like a sequel or something following up the case, they actually did a brief mention at the end about that. So I thought that was interesting. And also, Cumberbatch wasn't as long as I thought he was going to be.
No,
I thought he was going to play a bigger role, but he did a good job for what he did.
Yeah, I mean, his story arc definitely finished and made its point. So I understand why they didn't bring him back, but he was one of the few halfway decent white people in the whole movie.
Well,
so
you know who my
it would have
favorite
been
character
nice
was?
to.
My favorite character would be
Brad Pitt.
Of course.
Well,
the best human being in the movie.
Who I'm going to once again emphasize my argument that he is fantastic in supporting roles. Even though we only get about, I'm going to say 5 minutes. Would either of you?
Probably 2 scenes.
Yeah,
I mean.
Probably the same as Giamatti, actually.
Yeah, for the most
kind
part.
of on the opposite end of the spectrum.
But he's really, really good.
Yeah, he did a great job. I kind of want to see more of him, too. So everybody gave a great performance.
Yeah, the performances are fantastic. The cinematography, like you mentioned, Joe, is a really
beautiful
aspect of the movie.
Particularly with the lighting during some of the starting moments where he becomes a slave. You mentioned the element of subtlety to it. That's one of the things I actually agree with Joe on. It knew when to be subtle, but also knew when to capitalize on the brutality. You mentioned the hanging scene where it goes on for several minutes. I thought that was perfect in terms of how they make the shot wide to show how this is so brutal, and yet no one seems to make a single reaction towards it. Where they could have easily just had these obnoxious close-ups of him dangling and his feet scraping and what have you.
No, but they contrasted it with the society around him.
I thought that really fit the attitude well. Like I said, I completely see where you're coming from with the squeamishness. I honestly...
Oh, yeah, I wanted to leave. And that's, I mean, I'm not being flip about that. I wanted to leave the movie, and so did my friend.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
You know, I actually...
My friend is black that I went with,
well,
if that matters at all.
This
but
is kind of related once again, but
yeah.
I have a friend, I took a couple friends to see Django last year, and one of my friends is black, and the scene involving the Mandingo fighting, he actually got really uncomfortable and felt
I could see that.
So I thought there was some of that there, too. Like, even a more, I guess, upbeat film could still accentuate
Well,
those
I will say
it's
this.
sensitive.
People should at least try, if you think it might be too intense to see in the theater, get it on demand or something. That way, if you find it too... intense, you don't have to watch it. But I do think it's something that, I mean, it's a story that needs to be told and remembered. And
I agree.
All right, well, let's move on to the home media moment. And this is, this week, The Way, Way Back. Now, all 3 of us did see this in the theater. However, it was released before we started doing the Film Fanatics podcast, so we didn't actually get to talk about it. We mentioned it briefly when we revealed our top 10 movies of the summer. But now that it's out on DVD and Blu-ray, we thought it was time for a full review of this coming-of-age story, and Justin is going to tell us about The Way, Way Back.
Okay, so The Way, Way Back focuses on Duncan, played by Liam James, who is a taciturn 14-year-old spending his summer with his mother, played by Toni Collette, and her mean-spirited boyfriend, played by Steve Carell, who constantly belittles him. Desperate for an escape, Duncan ends up at a theme park called the Water Whiz, where a slacker attendant named Owen, played by a very fun performance by Sam Rockwell, who gives him a job and takes him under his wing. In an earlier podcast, I suggested the title for the first hour of this film might as well have been called The Wonderful Adventures of Selfish Parents, and I still do stand firm on that. It does take a long time for James to come out of his shell, and for the most part during that, he does seem a little bit odd, given that he says very little within that time, making one wonder if the parents are in fact the protagonists. However, once the audience enters the often hilarious antics from the Waterwoods theme park, the film really gets to take off. Sam Rockwell peppers the film with his usual but much-needed snarkiness, and his interplay with James is worth a watch alone. While one could debate if anything feels resolved or changed by the third act, The Way, Way Back still holds up as a quirky independent film this year that was a welcome surprise this summer, and I give it a B.
It was written and directed by Nat Faxon and Jim Rash, who actually won a screenwriting Oscar for The Descendants, which we're going to be talking about later on for our new classic. And unlike that film, which they adapted from a fantastic book, The Way, Way Back came completely from their own minds, and their twisted yet completely relatable sense of humor comes through in virtually every scene. Liam James is perfectly cast as Duncan, and I'm really glad they chose an unknown for the role, because it requires its actor to be so awkward and self-deprecating that you need to really believe he would basically go unnoticed by anybody in his world, until he finds his friends at the Water Whiz and comes into his own. And Liam James really makes it work. Toni Collette and Steve Carell play it so straight here that you really do go into Duncan's world of misery every time he comes home, which is exactly what the script requires. Justin, I don't agree that there's any part of this movie in which you think Steve Carell's character is a protagonist. The opening scene is him asking Duncan what he thinks of himself on a scale of 1 to 10, and then tells him what he thinks of him.
But here's the thing. Throughout that entire first hour, they focus on so much with everyone else that we almost feel like James is kicked to the side, which left me a little bit baffled.
But how does that make the parents protagonists?
Because they're literally focusing on everyone else.
But it's a movie about him. So if
it's
they're
a movie about him where they're focusing on literally everyone else.
Right, I think that makes them antagonists.
They're giving much more attention to everyone else but him.
All right, I'm going to continue, and then, Joe, I want to hear from you about that.
Okay.
I think Sam Rockwell is great, like Justin mentioned. I think, though, he's far from the only comedic talent in the film. Whenever Duncan goes to the water park, we are as pleased to see his co-workers as he is, and Faxon and Rash themselves, who play workers at the Water Whiz, are hilarious. Unfortunately for me, the love story in the film is entirely predictable and a bit of a throwaway, though necessary for a coming-of-age movie, I guess. It's nice and also honest that he's discovering his sexuality, but the core of the story is the dichotomy between his awful family life and his wonderful life at the water park. The crux of the movie is that he made friends and has a new approach to life, not necessarily, I thought, whether or not he gets the girl. But I really enjoyed The Way, Way Back, and I give it a B+.
I really kind of have to agree with you. I think that was kind of the centerfold, basically, kind of contrasting the life with the park with the family. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really where the movie shines, is seeing the antics of the people at the park. And, I mean, this movie just leaves a really warm feeling when I watch it. It's just a really good, wholesome movie, and I enjoy that. And plus, Sam Rockwell, I just love him. He's always kooky. He's always funny. He's a really great actor, and it's kind of good to see him really getting more of an establishment and getting more notice. Mm-hmm. I really like that. I think that the lead character was one who it did take a while to kind of grow on you, but I felt that the focus on everyone else was kind of supposed to imitate the fact that he felt kind of shut out and pushed to the side. I thought that was kind of the perspective they were going for. And as the film goes on, we kind of see him grow and kind of voice his own opinion and grow as a person.
Yeah, I mean, the whole movie is from his perspective.
And so to make us feel kind of, dejected and pushed to the side, obviously he's got to be quiet and pushed to the side.
But I think there were better ways to handle that instead of just simply letting everyone pretty much walk over him for the first act and then get to the Water Whiz where we can actually start having some fun with him and see why he's such a good, important character to this film.
Well, you're right. There might be possible ways to do that, but I think that it was a good way of, as you said, they kind of shoved him down, stamped him down, pushed him to the side. It's to kind of make us feel like, wow, this kid really isn't treated particularly well. Why can't we get to know him? And then we do, and we see that he is worth following as a main character.
But here's the thing. Because he was so awkward and quiet and off to the side for the better part of the movie, mm-hmm. I didn't really have any overwhelming desire to want to get to know his character. I just felt like, okay, let's see what else is happening while every parent becomes an obnoxious.
Take it from the middle child. I have been there on family vacations. I have been there my whole life. And I really resonated. I thought the Duncan character really resonated.
Well, given that I'm an older sibling, I'll let you have that one day.
Thank you.
You said you mentioned that Steve Carell, you thought he might have been the protagonist of the film. What did you mean by that?
Well, I wasn't referring to anyone specifically. I meant like the parents as a whole. Like every single adult character in this film seemed to be the main focus through that first hour, because despite Dan's affirmation that it's from his perspective, and for the most part I agree with you, I felt like we were getting so much more attention and character development to them instead of anyone else.
I think that was to help us better understand his position, honestly. Because if we can understand them, we can understand their feelings towards him, and just it kind of reinforces that dichotomy.
Well, and while we're getting to know them scene after scene after scene, they're dragging him along to all of these things. They drag him on the boat with them. They drag him, to the living room to have dance lessons.
There have been films that have worked where the main protagonist says little or nothing for long periods of time and manages to come into his own.
Which is fine, but I feel like there are ways that can be implemented better and still keep your character likable instead of making him so bizarrely awkward throughout the majority of that I just didn't feel any sort of attachment to him. If anything, I just was wondering, like, okay, why should I like this kid? All he does is mope around and...
Justin,
do you remember being a teenager, Justin?
I was about to say that's adolescence,
because they nailed it.
They nailed that feeling of being like, how old was he supposed to be at the
14.
time? Like, yeah, I remember 14 was sucky
14
time.
was rough.
14 is like probably the roughest, man. I felt it. I got it. I mean, maybe just have to kind of think back that time and say, hey, didn't quite speak out, but I guess it didn't work for you.
I feel like I should have been drawn in instead of feeling like I was sort of shut out from his character until we got to the Water Whiz and Sam Rockwell sort of pushes us in the right direction. It's one of the few times I can honestly say, thank God you were there, Sam Rockwell.
Okay.
Your grade is not much different from mine. It's a B+ versus a B. What is it that you liked so much about the film?
Like I said, it really got better once we enter Act 2 and we're introduced to the Water Whiz.
May I speak for him? He really likes Sam Rockwell.
That's all I'm gathering from it.
He completely steals the show.
And
however,
reinforcing my point.
Yeah.
And the antics within there, we do actually see some character development. We do see a decent narrative. And it really was close to a B+ until we enter third act, where honestly, there was sort of a minor love interest thing going on. I honestly didn't care for it. I know that wasn't the central focus of the story, but they wrap it up so abruptly. I was kind of left wondering, like, could there have been a better way to handle this? And the way they choose to end the film, I honestly felt like it was a return to form.
And this is a point I always disagree with you on. I think that the emotion that the particular character makes really obviously sets the tone, saying something has changed. The connection has been created between the two. It's been, rebuilt somewhat. Because
a little bit, maybe.
I loved the end of the film.
Because, I mean, that character would not have done something like that to kind of demonstrate to someone else that the feelings had changed. Like, it was significant. But just to kind of wrap it up, I will say that I did enjoy it. I kind of liked the romance. It was a bit awkward, but, I mean, it was okay. I mean, I didn't have a problem with it.
I don't think it was necessary, but I get why they did it.
I thought it was okay. As you said, coming of age.
They at least had chemistry.
I liked that. They did have chemistry. I thought it was decent. I liked those scenes. But overall, I'd give Way Back a B+ as well.
Very good. All right, we're going to move on now to our top 5. And this week, in honor of Last Vegas, we do our top 5 Las Vegas movies that take place all or in part in Las Vegas. And Joe, we usually start with you, so let's make today no exception. Numbers 5 through 2 of your Las Vegas top 5.
All right, my number 5 is Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. The main reason I'm picking this is because I kind of enjoy Hunter S. Thompson's writing. I kind of like that introspective look at the 60s and 70s, and I think this film has a lot of really interesting directorial elements to it, and cinematography is really cool, some interesting writing quirks, and honestly some really good performances. I think the main reason I put it on my list, though, is because before I saw this film, I really didn't like Johnny Depp that much. I just kept seeing him kind of do the same kooky character over and over again. I thought he was good, but I really didn't see what the fuss was all about. Then I saw this movie, and him doing an excellent Hunter S. Thompson impression, and being the fact that he was friends with the man, it's quite understandable. And I think that's the main reason why I really like Johnny Depp as an actor. He definitely has his moments, and I think for that alone, it was definitely significant.
How'd you feel about the quirkiness that Terry Gilliam throws into it with the drug aspect of the story?
I guess I could see maybe that wouldn't work for some people, but I really liked that. I thought it kind of added some of those weird, surreal elements that I like. And I mean, for a guy who, spent a lot of his time taking various drugs and whatnot, I mean, trying to show that perspective was an interesting angle to go with. And I think it captured the sense of what the character was going through. I liked it.
Did you see the Rum Diary, Joe?
I did not, but I guess if I liked Fear and Loathing, I should check it out. I've heard mixed things. Should I watch it?
I thought it was awful.
You did?
I really did, and it made me not want to ever watch Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. But hearing it in your top 5, I usually think you're a pretty good judge of character, so
Johnny Depp
maybe I'll check it out.
Fantastic job, and so does Tobey Maguire in a brief cameo.
Oh, nice.
My number 4 is The Hangover, the first one, not the second, not the third one. This movie really took me by surprise. It was really funny. I really liked Zach Galifianakis, and I loved the other characters, the other actors. I mean, it was just crazy, and it was enjoyable. A lot of good surprises. And there were just some moments that I was so confused by the random antics. I just thought the writers were making things up as they went along. And I'm sure that's what they were doing, but most of the time it worked for me. I really enjoyed it. My number 3 is Pay It Forward. I love Kevin Spacey, and this is one of the times I get to see him play a really kind of soft-spoken, really good, genuine person. And I really liked his relationship with Haley Joel Osment's character, and I really liked the message of this movie. I think it was quite a beautiful idea. Even though it has some really tragic elements to it, it's just one of those films that I think people should give a watch to, because if nothing else, I thought that it had a really, really good message and some great ideas.
I'd like to see that again, actually. I saw it in theater, so it's probably been, 10 or 11 years.
I saw it a while ago, too, but...
And I remember enjoying it.
It's one of those movies that does leave a good impression. I guess it might not be anything groundbreaking, but it's a good movie.
Well, and like you said, with the message of it, it's sort of one of those movies, like The Bucket List, where maybe not everybody saw the movie, but the concept gets sort of
embedded,
thrust into our society.
It really does. And I think around the time that film was made, there had been a lot of, school shootings, and, one of the, themes of the film was kind of showing the violence in the world. It was this positive, upbeat thing, and I liked that from a child's perspective. Honestly, the funny thing is, until you guys told me, I didn't realize it took place in Las Vegas. So
yeah, I didn't either until we looked at the list.
I thought that was really interesting. So yeah, that's my number 3. My number 2 is one you guys probably see coming. It's Bugsy, which is about the founding of Las Vegas, and particularly through its organized crime elements. Warren Beatty gives the best performance of his career, hands down.
Wow.
Besides Dick Tracy.
I was going to say, this is from Joe, the Dick Tracy fan.
I just realized, besides Dick Tracy, he just does a really good job, and it really captures the time period and the mentality of these different gangsters, and the really complicated aspect of Bugsy Siegel as this really crazy, kooky gangster with a psychopathic, homicidal streak, but also this genuine love for people and business and the love of the woman in his life. So you really get to see this complexity from a rather famous American criminal who is one of the chief founders of Las Vegas. And there's also a great Ben Kingsley as Meyer Lansky. So you get 2 great performances there.
I've never actually seen that one, and I
haven't either. I'm looking forward to it coming up in the Oscar A to Z in a couple of years.
It did make the list?
Oh, it was nominated for many things. I know Annette Bening was nominated. I think it was nominated for Best Picture, too.
It's kind of one of those gangster films. I wouldn't say it's really overly kind of permeating with lots of organized crime elements, but the performances are just so good. And it's got a lot of great set pieces. You guys should definitely check it out.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Well, I will give you my top 5 here. Before we get to that, though, I just looked up the Bugsy Awards list, and we will be watching it for our Oscar A to Z, but I was incorrect about the Annette Bening part. It was nominated for just about everything else. Warren Beatty was nominated. Harvey Keitel and Ben Kingsley were nominated for supporting, and it was also nominated for Best Director, Best Picture, and Best Writing.
To be honest, Dan, from memory, she wasn't the best part of the movie.
I guess not.
In honesty.
My number 5 is Rain Man. Now, this is my favorite movie on the list. It's in my top 25 of all time. However, I had to put it at number 5 because really only about 10 minutes of the movie takes place in Vegas. It is a road trip movie with Tom Cruise and Dustin Hoffman, of course, if you haven't seen it. But Las Vegas is just one of their stops, and there is a truly memorable scene at the casino where they're counting cards. But other than that, I don't really consider this a quote-unquote Vegas movie, so I have to leave it at number 5.
Excellent choice, Dan.
Thanks, Joe. My number 4, just like Joe, is The Hangover. The original Hangover. I was also blown away by it. It was very funny. I don't know if some of that was improv, like you said, or whatever, but they certainly seemed to have a great time. And this is one of the few examples of a movie where the actors seem to be having as much fun doing the movie as you are watching it.
I think that's why the film was so successful, because the actors had great chemistry and they just had a lot of fun with it.
Yeah. And they're all three likable guys. Like, you see any one of them on a talk show or something, and they're always funny and they're always charming, and so I think that worked in its favor as well.
Definitely.
My number 3 is 21. I only saw this movie once, but I would like to watch it again because I really remember enjoying it. Joe, I don't know if you've gotten to see this one.
I actually was kind of curious that's actually surprising you put it on there. It didn't look that good to me. I didn't see it.
Justin, you saw it, right?
I did. I thought it was okay. It wasn't quite what I was expecting it to be, but it was a take it for what it was kind of movie.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of like a fun ride.
Well, now that you're putting in number 3 for this list, I might check it out.
I might have to watch it.
Might have to.
My number 2 is Ocean's 11. And this was also number 2 on my Brad Pitt movies top 5, one that I just watched whenever we did the Brad Pitt top 5, so that was only maybe a month and a half ago.
Yeah, Moneyball.
And when we saw Moneyball. And I really, really love this movie. Ocean's 11 has great chemistry with the leads. It's a really, really fun heist movie. And I think if you're going to set a movie in Vegas, you do sort of want it to be of the fun variety. Obviously, there are some real depressing movies that take place in Vegas, and we may hear about one of them from Justin, I'm not sure, but I like to look at Vegas as, the fun, the entertaining aspects of it, and a movie like Ocean's 11 is just that. It's sort of, a popcorn, mindless sort of movie, but it really does work. Justin?
Okay, so number 5 is, as you both had it on your list, The Hangover. While I'm a firm believer that this film is, for the most part, overrated, I have to admit it's a pretty good example of what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. The ensemble brings quite a bit of humor into the somewhat original narrative, with a number of scenes that I'm certain will become iconic in and of themselves. However, my issue with putting The Hangover much higher on this list comes from the fact that the humor is largely hit or miss, and for me, many of these scenes that'll probably end up being talked about for years to come off as kind of clunky and sometimes awkward. That said, The Hangover really is everyone's worst, albeit funny nightmare of celebrating out in Vegas, and for that, I have to give it a spot on my list.
I do think it's a little overrated as well, but I find it pretty original.
I agree with you there. I would definitely say it's overrated too, but when I saw it, I really, really enjoyed it a lot more than I was expecting to.
Yeah.
Number 4 is Rain Man. Similar to The Hangover, giving Rain Man a spot on this list was a hard call, given that, as Dan put it, only a small portion of this film actually takes place in Vegas. However, it truly is one of the film's most iconic scenes, and the one most prominently brought up by anyone discussing it, save Hoffman's performance as an autistic savant. Note, not a retard, as Zach Galifianakis points out in a tasteless joke. Throw in a brave and way ahead of its time subject matter and great characters, and it's not hard to see why I had to make this my number 4 for this list. Number 3 is a recent film, and that is Behind the Candelabra.
Oh, I still got to see that.
No, I haven't seen that either.
I have it, and I haven't watched it yet.
Dan, I'm going to tell you straight up, you're missing out.
I feel like I'm going to give it a big fat A, Justin, when I see it.
Yeah, you got to watch it. I'm really annoyed at Steven Soderbergh this year because in the past he made all these films that I was largely underwhelmed by. I was not, as Dan knows, I was not a big fan of Magic Mike. I thought Ocean's 11 was kind of boring. Admittedly, I didn't see Traffic, but
Traffic's good.
This year we got Side Effects, which I thought was a fantastic homage to a Hitchcock thriller, and Behind the Candelabra, which he really brings home through Michael Douglas playing the flamboyantly eccentric musician Liberace. While it's not all about the city, which is why I can't put it much higher than my number 3, the tagline really does sum up not just why the film is on this list, but also captures the spirit of Las Vegas itself. Too much of a good thing is wonderful. And number 2, Dan, you are correct on the depressing part. Leaving Las Vegas.
That's the one.
I knew that was coming.
This is quite possibly the bleakest, ugliest portrayal in the bunch, but I have to say it's quite possibly one of the best, thanks to a great, and I do mean it when I say great, performance by Nicolas Cage. His character is depressed, wanting to die, and the audience feels every ounce of his pain throughout the 2-hour adventure. That's not to say Cage's chemistry with his co-star Elizabeth Shue is any less impressive. I won't say this is an easy watch, but for great performances in a depressing story in a place often referred to as Sin City, I have to make Leaving Las Vegas my number 2.
Joe, what is your number 1?
Well, I was kind of conflicted about this because Rain Man would be my number one because I think it's an excellent film, and I really think Tom Cruise and Dustin Hoffman did a great job. And as Justin said, it really kind of went ahead of time with the subject matter. Mm-hmm. It was great. That would easily be my number one. But really, for capturing the dark underbelly of Las Vegas, for a lot of the amazing performances and directing behind it, my number one would be Casino.
That's another one that I recently purchased and have not seen yet.
It's really does a great job. I think that's primarily because of Scorsese's directing and just these actors that are so seasoned and have great chemistry. And it really is kind of an engaging thriller and drama. And I really think it shows kind of the dark underbelly of Vegas and how it functions so well. Though I will admit, the first time I saw it, I didn't like it that much. It actually required a couple viewings, but it really, really grows over time.
And it's a long one, right?
It is a long
It's almost 3 hours.
But it really moves.
It's an epic.
Does it?
It is an epic. It doesn't feel that long at all.
Very good. Well, my number one is one of the all-time best comedies, in my opinion. Certainly one of the best spoofs out there, and that is Austin Powers' International Man of Mystery. The very first Austin Powers, which takes place partially in Vegas, is just a comedy treat. This was so out of left field when it was first in theaters. It did not do all that well and found renewed life on DVD and multiple cable airings. Enough that they, of course, made the second and third Austin Powers, with a fourth one possibly in the works, says Mike Myers. But I loved Austin Powers. I was not a kid when they were out, so I'm looking forward a little bit to hearing from you guys, because you guys were probably in the proper demographic for it. I was about 20 maybe when Austin Powers came out, but I found it no less engaging or funny, and despite the catchphrases getting pretty worn thin, I still think the original Austin Powers is a comedy classic.
It's actually funny in my case because, yes, it did come out when I was a kid, but my parents would not let me watch it until maybe 1 or 2 years after the third one had been released. And I actually ended up seeing them, the third one, the first one, and then the second one.
Not the right order.
Not the right order at all, but I'm glad I started with the third one because I consider that the funniest.
They're all great.
Oh, no.
They really are.
They all are well worth a watch. It's just I like the third one the best.
Joe, you saw that, I assume, when you were a kid?
Oh, yeah. I actually was a huge fan of the Austin Powers movies when I was younger. I guess I was in my early teens when they came out. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were really funny. I actually think that the first one's the one I'm the most rusty on because I saw it a long time ago. I kind of think I preferred Goldmember the most as well, and that's why it was shagging me. So I think I'd have to go back and watch the first one because I saw it the least. Mm-hmm. But they are funny movies, and I could see why you enjoy it. They're pretty cool. I particularly liked Will Ferrell's character. He always got me laughing.
Best side character ever.
It really is. He's hilarious.
That's probably the part that sticks out the most from that movie.
And the fact that they did not just the same gag, but almost the exact same script for his role in the second one it's just so classic.
And it manages to be even funnier.
It really does.
Too bad they couldn't bring him in for the third one somehow.
All right, Justin, what's your number one?
Okay, my number one, much like Joe, is Casino.
Wow.
There's no question that Scorsese is a fantastic director, but even I was a little concerned about Casino when I first saw it.
Why is that, Justin?
It was a crime epic, and given that most of his films usually clock in about 2 hours, give or take, I was a little concerned, an apparent reoccurring theme with me. But needless to say, it was everything I expected it to be and more. As Dan and I have often discussed, when a film gets to 3 hours, it tends to drag along and the audience gets a little tired. Casino, as I put earlier, keeps rolling, and with great performances and phenomenal cinematography, it weaves a tale that views the city both as a place of glamour and a place of downright evil. For those reasons and many more, Casino receives my number one.
Wow. Well, I definitely do have to check it out then.
It is a masterpiece of crime drama. Absolutely.
All right. Well, we are running a bit short on time, so we're going to head right into our triple feature. And first up is our new classic, and that is The Descendants. Now, this isn't our Oscar A to Z movie of the week, but we've done few new classics with such high-profile Oscar love. Like I mentioned earlier when we talked about The Way, Way Back, it won Best Adapted Screenplay, but it was also nominated for, among other things, Best Actor, Best Director, and Best Picture. George Clooney plays Matt King, a lawyer and the only trustee of 25,000 acres of Kauaian land. At the same time as Matt is in negotiations to sell the land with his cousins, his wife has a boating accident and falls into a coma, and Matt's life starts to fall apart as well. He has 2 daughters, Alex, played by Shailene Woodley, a 17-year-old hellion, and Scotty, Amara Miller, a 10-year-old with more than a couple social etiquette issues. And he just finds out that before his wife went into her coma, she was cheating on Matt and was intending to leave him. Alexander Payne directs The Descendants, and like his previous films, such as Election and About Schmidt, we really get to know these characters from the inside out, flaws and all. To so many people on the island reading about the potential sale of the land, which could impact the island in a negative way for its natives, Matt is just a greedy, rich trust fund guy with no regard for anybody but himself. But it's evident from the start of the film that this couldn't be further from the truth. He is faced with running a household when he barely even knows his kids. He is faced with a dying, cheating wife, as well as a curmudgeonly father-in-law who blames him for his wife's coma. It's quite possibly Clooney's finest performance with respect to Up in the Air as well. And though I can admit that The Artist is probably a better film technically and deserved to win Best Picture in 2011, Clooney that year was completely robbed of a Best Actor statuette. Now let's get off of him for a second. The kids, including Alex's boyfriend, smartass Sid, played by Nick Krause, are as real as they come, and though Amara Miller isn't the best child actress out there, her character gets just enough to do that you don't really notice. Even Matthew Lillard, as the man cheating with Matt's wife in his one scene here, is in top form. You throw in Faxon and Rash as screenwriters, and it gives it just enough of a comedic punch to make it come together like real life, like many Alexander Payne movies. Maybe most fascinating of all, for me, was the idea that the centerpiece and what every single thing in the movie revolves around is a character who is in a coma for the entire film and doesn't utter a word. Based on a book which I can also recommend, The Descendants gets an A+ from me.
I'm not going to be able to top that.
Amazing movie.
Put some heart into that one.
Yeah, I did.
You really did.
I love that movie.
I know.
And I have to say I really liked it too. Alexander Payne is a man that likes to capture the concept of human tragedy, as we saw earlier in the podcast's history with About Schmidt, and we really see that continued here. George Clooney playing Matt King, a man left with 2 very difficult decisions to make, is both engrossing and heartbreaking. However, what the film suffers from is its occasional attempts for humor. Krause is the friend/boyfriend, it's never exactly specified, of Alexandra, is completely useless, and seems like his sole purpose is to annoy everyone, including the audience. This is perhaps the biggest issue of the film. The majority of the ensemble gets little to no exposition and just feels two-dimensional. Though despite these flaws, The Descendants still provides a strong narrative with 2 great characters dealing with tragedy amidst the other aspects of life, and that's a theme that's more than painfully relatable. The Descendants gets a B+.
Joe?
I have to say I really enjoyed this film. I really love Alexander Payne's movies. I mean, I don't think I've seen a bad one that he's done. And he really does bring that really gritty human story to life. And it's really well reflected on screen. I think this is a perfect example of that. As you said, this man, going through this incredible crisis and having to juggle all these different problems at the same time, and yet showing this outside perspective of the island inhabitants as well. I really think that's quite brilliant, honestly. Mm-hmm. The strength of the film for me that was really the most poignant was probably in the performances. I just thought that the acting was amazing across the board, and I think that's really what held it together for me. And that with a strong narrative, as Justin pointed out. I mean, it was great. The funny thing, as you guys know, I'm not a huge George Clooney fan, but this role was one I think he really, really put a lot of time and effort into, and it really sold it for me. I really, really got behind him, and I enjoyed it a lot. To be honest, for that alone, just that performance blowing me out of the water, really, I would have to give The Descendants an A.
Yeah, he tackles it with full force.
I mean, this is definitely one that he just holds. I mean, this is a film that's completely centered around him. I think he's the main reason it's so amazing.
Yeah. And I don't deny that I did spend a lot of time crafting my review of that movie.
I just thought you summed it up brilliantly.
It is a fantastic piece of cinema. I don't put movies in my top 25 within the first couple of years because I think they do need a little time to breathe. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, this was my 4th time watching this movie. I read the book after my 3rd time because I wanted to see the differences.
How does it compare, actually?
Actually, it is quite a faithful adaptation. The name of his wife is changed for whatever reason, but other than that, Alexander Payne and Nat Faxon and Jim Rash really took everything great with the book and put it on the screen. And the care they took in, reworking a scene here. There's a few differences, as you would expect, but it's not a super long book, and the movie runs about 2 hours, so there isn't a whole lot of things that are left out
from the way
the film.
From the way it was paced and put together, it seemed like they were really taking their time to take out important points and just kind of make sure that they were told accurately. Yeah. But I didn't know because I haven't read the book.
I do have to take issue with what Justin said about Sid, as you might imagine. It's not clear whether or not he's the boyfriend or a friend, because that's how the Alex character is played. I mean, the first time we see her, she's at her boarding school, getting drunk in a field somewhere after hours.
Yeah, right.
She's kind of, hey, go with the flow. So I think they're probably boyfriend and girlfriend, but I don't think it matters to them, so why should it matter to the audience?
And I agree, and that's not my that's not my point with that. That was just the fact that I don't actually know what his title is. So
well, I think his main purpose in the film is for the comic relief, and obviously it didn't work for you. But I thought he had some pretty funny lines and some pretty memorable moments.
I think it's understandable why it was there. It was kind of a heavy film. You sort of needed something to kind of mix that up.
But here's the thing. With Alexander Payne, he does a very good job of at least giving his side characters something to do that can sometimes lighten the general tone of the movie. For example, with About Schmidt, it is a very heavy-handed, kind of depressing movie, but there are still some characters that add a certain amount of brightness to it, even though it's not necessarily looking like the happiest of situations. Mm-hmm. And this, Sid just seems flat to me. He serves no purpose other than, like I said, to literally annoy everyone.
Okay, well, let me speak to that also. When they go to the island to try and find Matthew Lillard and confront him about the cheating business, Scotty, the 10-year-old daughter, doesn't know anything about the cheating. She doesn't know how bad her mother's prognosis is. So when Matt and Alex go to confront him, they need somebody to watch Scotty, and that's where Sid comes in. He watches her for a good portion of the movie, while George Clooney and Shailene Woodley are out and about doing their coma business, doing their spy business on Matthew Lillard, etc., etc.
So by that logic, Sid is reduced to a comic relief plot device.
But he still...
I just explained to you the purpose he served, though. You asked what purpose he served other than to annoy everybody, and I'm telling you that he was...
Maybe he was supposed to be an annoying character.
A glorified babysitter,
which is okay, but I feel like that seems sort of out of place for an Alexander Payne movie, because his characters still seem to have some degree of depth. That was one of the most frustrating things about this movie.
He's a jerky kid. I mean, why does he need depth?
I mean, to be honest, there were some side characters in other films he's done that honestly were there for the laughs and didn't have a whole lot of depth. Schmidt's daughter's fiance didn't have a lot of depth, but he got us laughing even though he's despicable. Good example there.
But with Sid, he shows up for no reason. He doesn't really go anywhere. We don't feel like he's changed at all. Yes, Dan, you are correct on the fact that we may get a kind of logic to why he's the way he is, but I think it's a terrible reason to justify him being an annoying...
Why would he change, though? Why would a character like that, in the span of a week and a half, change?
In all honesty, sometimes people don't change, and sometimes certain characters don't change. I mean, he wasn't the main focus of the film. Honestly, I admit that he didn't get me laughing all the time, but I understood why he was there. I thought it was all right.
All right, it's an agree to disagree because we have to move on.
Agreed.
Next up is Nicholas Nickleby, and Joe's going to tell us about that.
Nicholas Nickleby, it's basically based upon Charles Dickens' last story, which he did not actually finish. The ending was left a little open-ended. But basically it follows a young man by the name of Nicholas Nickleby, whose father recently passed away after losing his entire family fortune, what little he had, and leaving his son, his daughter, and his widowed wife to go off to the city to find his brother, an evil uncle played by...
Christopher Plummer.
Everybody. Christopher Plummer.
Oh, yes, amazing. My favorite.
And we all love Christopher Plummer.
Love Christopher Plummer.
And it's great. Just one of the many awesome ensemble casts. We've got Anne Hathaway, we've got Nathan Lane, Timothy Spall, Julia Stevenson. We've got a lot of great British actors. Pretty much everybody top-notch is in this film. And basically, Nicholas is sent away to be a master at a boarding school from his uncle's suggestion, but it turns out to be a dark and dreary place where he befriends a young, disabled boy named Smike, and the two run off together and have various adventures. Meanwhile, his sister is being used by his uncle to possibly curry sexual favors in order to engage in business affairs with some of his colleagues, basically inferring that Christopher Plummer's character is the most despicable, vile Charles Dickens villain you could possibly imagine, or at least one of them. I have to say that I really enjoyed this film. The costume design, cinematography were quite good for the most part. I will admit the film does run on a bit long, but for the most part I was engaged. I really liked a lot of the characters, particularly the side characters. And I think just the fact that there were a lot of really good funny lines, and even though there are some darker elements to the film as you would expect from Charles Dickens, there is a lot of brightness and there is some hope. I really just like the fact that the main character is such a good person that you can honestly get behind, and that positivism is something that you don't see too much in Dickens, which I think is kind of speaking to how he was feeling at the end of his life after writing all these dreary, depressing novels about, English society and its problems. There was some hope, and I think the performances were excellent. Admittedly, as I said, there were some slower points, but overall I did like the narrative. It kind of balances between adventure, comedy, drama, with a little bit of mystery there, which I think was kind of forced towards the end, but overall, I enjoyed it, and I would give Nicholas Nickleby a B+.
All right, well, I have to ask, how many movies that take place more than a century ago can people bring to our old classic of the week? This is our third one in 4 weeks, following Far and Away and The Last of the Mohicans. Thankfully, at least, my buddy Joe broke the trend last week with The Day the Earth Stood Still.
Of course.
But in terms of the period pieces, this is the best one yet. Based on Charles Dickens' classic story from 1838, this is a fairly strong adaptation. Like Joe mentioned, the cast is fantastic, led by Charlie Hunnam as Nicholas, and all those other great people that Joe mentioned, Anne Hathaway, Nathan Lane, Jamie Bell, Alan Cumming are also in the cast, and an always outstanding Christopher Plummer. I wish that the characters, some of them were allowed to develop a little bit more, though. It is an abridged version of the novel. It actually originally wasn't a novel. It was a set of stories. But this is an abridged version of that. And while it's true that it actually does drag on a little bit long, at the same time, I felt like I wanted to know a little bit more about these characters. Not that I wanted the movie to be longer necessarily, but maybe they could have chosen some better ways to do it. Instead, they chose to focus a little bit more on the comedy aspects of the story, which I didn't think was necessarily a bad choice because it is one of the few famous Dickens works that has a good sense of humor. But because of that, we're spared further exploration of certain characters. I think the humor worked out, but maybe there was a little bit too much of it. And it also does drag in certain areas, but it was kind of how the story was built, so I can't really fault it for that.
Some vignettes, pretty much.
Yeah. But overall, I really did like this movie. Our friend Destiny was the one that brought it to us, and I leave Nicholas Nickleby with a B. Justin?
This is a film that's worth seeing based on the sheer amount of star power alone. From the quirky Nathan Lane to the elegant, albeit sinister Christopher Plummer, to a very innocent early role for current star Anne Hathaway. While the narrative may not be as compelling as other Dickens tales like Oliver Twist and David Copperfield, it does keep moving and the story manages to uphold interest despite a rather long running time. The problem comes from the fact that Nicholas Nickleby can often fall prey to occasional cheesiness, particularly around the third act. While I did think Hathaway did a decent job in her role, the fact that the audience does not get to see much of her until the third act gets sort of frustrating, particularly given that she's supposed to be the main love interest of the film.
I kept asking where she went.
And that's honestly the biggest issue with this film. There's just too much going on, and given Dickens' themes prominent in all of his novels, much of it is familiar, and we've probably seen it done better. As a result, Nicholas Nickleby has a bit of a heavy agenda that, while interesting, has been somewhat seen before, and for that, I give it a B.
I have to say, though, if they kind of went into detail of every little thing, the movie would have been about 6 hours long.
It would have been a miniseries.
Yeah, so, I mean, to be fair, I think for what they did in, 2.5 hours?
Yeah, it was about 2:15, I think.
I do agree with you. I think that the romantic interest was one thing that was kind of shooting there towards the end, but I felt like it was something we just kind of accepted, and it did fall prey to cheesiness, but I think the main component, the main story of the movie, was fairly successful.
Well, and as Justin mentioned, this is an early role for Anne Hathaway, and kudos to them for sort of picking her out of the lineup, because at that point she was doing like Princess Diaries type movies.
It's actually...
and to give her this sort of a role...
It's actually this... I think it's this film that was one of the ones that got other directors' attentions to seeing that she could do films like Brokeback Mountain and...
I don't doubt it, because...
this was one of the few times she actually really showed real... I'm not saying she didn't have acting talent before, but something
real promise.
More dramatic, more sophisticated, I guess.
I agree. All right, well, this week we started a new weekly tradition to go along with our triple feature, an add-on, if you will. I realized that we are running a fair amount of very old movies for our Oscar nominee A to Z, and Joe has expressed not disinterest, but maybe...
lack of enthusiasm?
lack of enthusiasm, let's say, for some of these older films. So I thought, well, what could make Oscar night pop for Joe? And I have a collection of Superman serials. So I thought it would be fun to run a chapter before each Oscar movie and then expand it to other series after the Superman episodes were completed. Now, if you don't know, movie serials were very popular from the silent era to the early 1950s, when television sort of caused the format to eventually be obsolete, and they would be run in episodic form, usually between 12 and 15 chapters per serial of about 17 minutes each. And a new chapter would be shown weekly before that week's movie at the cinema, along with newsreels, cartoons, and other short films. Some of the most famous comic book and sci-fi characters of all time have had their own movie serials, such as Batman, Flash Gordon, Dick Tracy, The Lone Ranger, and Captain America. Once TV came along, many of these serials were then broadcast there on the weekends. But maybe the best part of all is that each episode closed in a cliffhanger with a tag along the lines of, "Be here next week at this theater and see if Superman can save the world," or something to that effect. We're not going to review each chapter of every serial, that would be a bit time-consuming, but certainly once it wraps up, we will discuss it, and maybe halfway through we'll talk about it a little bit or something. But our first serial is the 15-part Superman from 1948, the first Superman story to be filmed. In Chapter 1, we have the classic origin story starting on Krypton and Superman being sent to Earth, being found by the Kents, and him learning of his superpowers and meeting Lois Lane. Basically what we saw in the first hour of this year's Man of Steel. And I thought Chapter 1 was fantastic. Justin and I were speaking either the next day or the day after, just saying, oh, we can't wait for Chapter 2 of Superman. It's a lot of fun to see these serials, and you can really tell how it was the precursor to episodic television. And in fact, for some of the stuff for Superman, they decided to animate some of the effects, at least, which I thought was kind of interesting. A little cheesy, but kind of interesting that they did that. I didn't mind it.
Probably better than plastic.
Probably a lot better than, what they could have done. I actually thought, when we saw the animated with the live action at the same time, I thought, wow, this is like precursor to Mary Poppins. Pretty impressive, kind of stuff. Actually. Yeah, so I thought it worked very well. In general, storyline, of course, is there. It's the classic origin story. But, Joe, what did you think of the first chapter of Superman?
I actually really, really liked it. And to be perfectly honest, as far as origin stories go, on screen, other than the Superman animated series, I think it's probably the best origin story I've seen on film. Because, admittedly, there was a lot of exposition, but it was really fun exposition.
Yeah.
And the acting was actually pretty good among the Kryptonians. I liked that. Once we got to Earth, things were pretty quickly established. And the cliffhanger for the next episode really, really had me excited. So I'm really looking forward to the next one.
We have to see if he stops this train.
I got to see if the train doesn't hit him and how he gets out of it. I think that definitely starting off, it was really, really good, and I can't wait. It's quite excellent.
And Kirk Allen is the gentleman that plays Superman, who we've never heard before. He didn't play Superman in the TV show or anything.
No, I actually thought they were one and the same, but he does a good job. He's a good Superman. I like him.
Justin, what'd you think of our first serial? You were probably most excited of all.
I lit up like a Christmas tree.
Yeah.
I have been a huge fan of serials since I heard tell of them from my grandparents, who used to be big fans of them, and to hear this introduction just completely blew my mind. I've only seen one prior to this, but it, needless to say, left a good impression on me. Obviously, we're familiar with the Superman stories, but I really did enjoy it. I thought the man who played Jor-El, he did a very good job. I thought he honestly could give Marlon Brando a run for his money.
He was good, yeah.
He was. And it's also the second time, I didn't realize this, that we actually got a somewhat legitimate reason why Krypton is exploding.
Yeah.
Which was a huge problem I always had with the Superman mythos.
Yeah, it's something that's always been kind of vague and does change from time to time.
Exactly. Because it's 17 minutes, they have to do their best to keep it somewhat interesting. And I love the fact that they always give you a reason to want to come back for more. And I think we're going to see that play off better and better and better as we head down the 15 chapters.
Well, I hope that we can continue beyond Superman and do things like Dick Tracy. That's what I'm curious about.
Yeah, in fact, as we were watching our Oscar nominee movie, which I'll tell you about in a second, The Adventures of Robin Hood, I sort of went online to look at certain other serials, and there's a lot of them that have come out on DVD that you can get from online retailers. And in fact, I bought this one at Best Buy. It's both of the Superman serials, the 48 one, and there's one from 1950 as well. So if you are interested, there's plenty of places that you can check them out. But let's get to our Oscar A to Z movie, and that was The Adventures of Robin Hood. Now, this won 2 technical awards, art direction and editing, and also original score at the Academy Awards. But what placed it on our A to Z list is its Best Picture nomination. The movie was produced for $2 million, a very large sum at the time, and was Warner Brothers' first color film utilizing Technicolor. At the time, the Warners were largely known for low-budget gangster films, but were making a new name for themselves for a few adventure movies starring Errol Flynn, so they cast him as Robin Hood to continue that trend. And it paid off because the film ended the year with over $4 million in box office receipts. Justin, tell us about The Adventures of Robin Hood from 1938.
For anyone unfamiliar with the mythos, after opposing Prince John, played by Claude Rains' vicious taxations, Saxon Lord Sir Robin of Locksley, played by Errol Flynn, is declared an outlaw. As a result, Robin puts together a team of bandits to rebel against Prince John by stealing from the rich and giving to the poor, while occasionally wooing Maid Marian, Olivia de Havilland. In the 1930s, this was a big-budget blockbuster, and it's not hard to see why. From the film's opening scenes, the entire film is brought to life in Technicolor that gives the film an almost storybook feel. As a result, the elaborate action sequences never fail to entertain, the acting on all parts is very well done, and the score captures just the right attitude The Adventures of Robin Hood needs to have at just the right moment without feeling cheesy. The addition of humor not only still holds up, but often keeps the film from becoming too serious in the subject matter. The Adventures of Robin Hood is a timeless, fun adventure film that I truly hope I see again soon, and I give it a very high A.
Yeah, let's start with this. I was not really looking forward to this movie. Robin Hood isn't typically the kind of thing I usually go for, but that feeling faded away within mere moments. Everything about this film is a win. Flynn is fantastic in the role, the action looks great, and it's exciting by even today's standards. And saying the color is gorgeous is a huge understatement, especially considering this came out 1 year before The Wizard of Oz. When we first started watching it, I really thought it was a film that had been colorized when that was all the rage in the 80s, but to find out it was filmed that way in 1938 honestly blew me away. I must have mentioned 4 times during the movie how great it looked. I'm not saying The Adventures of Robin Hood should be spoken in the same sentence as The Wizard of Oz as far as all-time classic family movies, but it certainly wouldn't be a mistake to at least include it in the same chapter. I give The Adventures of Robin Hood an A+.
You know, I really think that the best thing about this movie is just how really intricate everything was put together, particularly the costume designs. I just loved it.
Oh my god, yeah.
And you can tell that they really utilized Technicolor so well. This film is just beautiful to look at. And as you guys mentioned, the acting was amazing, the writing was quite witty, and honestly, the choreography of the action was pretty good. This is definitely a blockbuster of the time, and I think we mentioned that if we watched this film in 1938, it would probably have been a lot of people's favorite films. They saw this, it would have blown everybody away.
Yeah.
And I say that for a film that's 75 years old, it holds up
amazing.
Really well. And one thing I liked about it, too, is that even though it kind of balanced the sort of fairy tale and mythological aspect of the character of Robin Hood, it actually kind of played fairly well to the actual history of the story. It was fairly accurate, especially for a film that was so old. I thought it would get kind of cheesy, but based upon the actual facts around that myth, it did a good job of exploring that as well. All in all, it was just really, really well pieced together, and I think Errol Flynn was just an amazing Robin Hood. This is easily one of the best versions of the character, and of all the movies that we've seen recently, it's probably my favorite. I really, really love this movie, and I would easily give it an A+.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and it really... I'll say it again, it just surprises me, because you always think of, The Wizard of Oz as being the first, major color picture. But to know that this came out a year before it and just was so gorgeous, it just blew me away.
Honestly, I was surprised to find that out too, and I think that in terms of costume design, I think as far as the contrast, it might have even been better than Wizard of Oz, because Wizard of Oz had a lot of great like set pieces that had beautiful color and utilized it well, but I don't think even Wizard of Oz had that many different colored costumes all contrasting.
Other than Munchkinland, it didn't.
I think that was really, really cool to see that.
Yeah, it was. And you mentioned the score when we were watching it as well, which makes sense that it would have won, original score at the Oscars.
Great music that was fitting with every scene. It was just perfect. It was perfect filmmaking. It really was.
All right, well, we are definitely out of time. Next week, probably not so long because there's only one major release coming out, but we will get to that, and we will also review About Time, starring Rachel McAdams. And Joe's got the Merlin YouTube page up and running, which is Merlin the Magnificent.
Or the Mighty.
The Mighty, Merlin the Mighty. Or you can just link to it from this page. We've got links to it at the end of every one of our episodes.
And I promise I'm going to go into more depth about the Dark World, because I really need to. I'm not done talking about it.
You need to get it out.
I really do.
And you can, of course, join us on Facebook at Film Fanatics with an exclamation point, and our Twitter feed as well, which is at Film Fanatics Pod. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you back here next week. Bye!